I'm painting all of Minecraft by hand, one block a day for 5 years. But what does that actually look like? Let me show you. This all just started from a silly idea where I just thought, could I paint something and put it in Minecraft? And turns out you actually can. So I shared it on the internet and you guys think it's pretty cool too. But here's the challenge. Minecraft has over 2,000 blocks, and if I paint one a day, it's gonna take me 5 years to finish this. So I hope you're in it for the long haul. But as for today, I'm gonna show you my process for painting one of the flowers, the sunflower. I'm gonna show you all my materials. I'm gonna show you how I create the grid, how I sketch the texture outline on top of the grid, mix my paints, and actually paint the flower. And then I'm gonna show you how I get it in Minecraft and the final reveal of the painted flower in Minecraft. Let's get right into it. Alright, so I have a collection of paintbrushes here. I don't really go for a specific brand, it's more about a size or shape. I also love to have a color wheel around just for reference. These are the paints that I use. It's the Holbein Artist Gouache. I like using gouache because it's kind of a mixture of watercolor and acrylic paint. So it blends really nicely and it can be reactivated with water. And then you need to use a mixed media paper type when you're using gouache because you can use a lot of water with it, so you want it to be thick enough. These are the two paintbrushes I'm using a lot right now. So a little teeny tiny brush and then more of a flat rectangular brush because it makes really good crisp lines. I also recommend having some good rulers around. I like an architect scale because, well, I studied architecture, so that makes sense to me in my head. I'll show you a little bit later why I like using that specifically for painting in Minecraft. Pointing here to my paper towel that I really like to dab off my paintbrushes, and then I like to have 2 cups of water, clean water for mixing paint and a dirty water for cleaning brushes. Then I always have a palette. Like I said, you can reactivate gouache, so I actually leave my colors on there and reactivate them as to not waste any paint. So now I'm starting the first step in the process, which is setting up the grid. This is one of the most tedious processes, but it is definitely necessary, and it's really important to get this right because everything else will be based off of this. So I take my mixed media paper and I like to take it out of the ring, and then it does have a perforated edge here, but I find it pretty difficult to not bend the paper when trying to get that edge off, so I just cut it with scissors. So I was measuring the one I had done before because I had the measurements already and why I calculated again, but really it will depend on your size of paper. I know I can fit 10 inches vertically and then 8 inches across the bottom, so that's kind of what I like to do, is center that on the middle of the paper. After I create the boundaries, I'm basically just going to be marking it every 2 inches, and that's because in every 2 inches there are 16 parts. You want to have 16 parts because a Minecraft block is made out of 16 by 16 pixels, so you want to make a bunch of grids that are 16 by 16 squares wide. So the easiest way for me to do that, I found, was to just do 2-inch blocks. This is my architect scale, and an 1/8 inch scale, an inch is equal to 8 feet, so 2 inches is 16 parts, and you can see that here I'm lining it up and it goes up to 16 when you put it at 2 inches. So you could just use a typical ruler and just go on the same lines, but it's just easier for me to not have to do the math and use the 1/8 inch ruler. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm just marking 16 parts out of every 2 inches, and then you have to go with your big ruler and make a line across the entire sheet every 16th of your 2 inches. And here's what it looks like when I finish one block of the 20 blocks on the sheet. It takes a little while to get them all done. Now we're moving on to how I sketch, mix, and paint everything. So I'm going into my Paint It Pixels texture pack right now, and I'm heading into assets and then navigating towards textures. Then I go into blocks and I find the texture that I want to paint. This is how I get the reference photo for the texture that I'm going to paint. Today I decided I wanted to paint the sunflower, so I'm going and looking at the sunflower textures, and there are 4 different textures that make up the sunflower because it's 2 blocks high, and then it has the front and the back of the actual sunflower. I will have to reference all of those, so here I am opening it up, looking at it. And another good way to look at it is to open them in Photoshop because it will actually give you a grid so you can count out how many blocks deep that sunflower is into the grid. Since the sunflower texture has 4 different textures that I have to paint, I needed to add 3 more finished grids to my paper. So I went ahead and started tracing the lines for that. Then I will use the textures I showed you how to reference earlier to start counting out the grid and tracing onto my paper grid the actual outline of the texture so I know where to put my little paint dots as I go. If I had to count out the squares every single time without an outline, I think I would go insane. I do very often mess up the design. I count a pixel wrong and I didn't realize, and I finished it and then I realized everything's one pixel off and I have to erase and redo it. It's totally fine. It gets covered up with paint, but it's just one of those things, you know, you're not gonna get it right every time and it's okay. Now we're getting into mixing the actual colors that we need for the sunflower. I started with Permanent Green Deep and Permanent Green Light because I think Permanent Green Deep has more of a blue undertone, but Permanent Green Light has more of a yellow undertone, so I normally like to use those together. I obviously added some more lemon yellow, bright yellow to brighten all that up. I also added Ultramarine Deep, which is a blue, and that's going to help us get those shadowy tones. I don't really like to use black in mixing colors because I find it really muddies the color, so instead I just use a darker tone of blue, and that kind of helps bring out the shadow tones. Now I'm trying to mix the right shade of green for the bottom of the sunflower, and all green is not made the same. Some greens lean more blue, some greens lean more yellow, so I had to make sure I tested as I went and found that right color for the sunflower. I felt like this wasn't getting dark enough and it needed a little bit more of a golden undertone to it, so I added this yellow ochre to it and I felt like that gave it just the right touch that it needed. Now I'm going back over to the painting, looking at my reference photos to figure out where those darkest tones are. I normally like to start with the darkest or the lightest tone, it depends on the color that I'm mixing. For this one, I started with the darkest and identified all those places. Of course, I did not do everything in the right order. I normally like to try to erase some of the lines with a rubber eraser or a kneaded eraser because it helps when I scan it in to not have those pencil lines show through by accident under some lighter colors. But you know, you live and you learn, you make mistakes, and you just keep going. So now I'm adding more yellow to that darker color that we mixed earlier. Each time I need a lighter color, I'm basically just adding more yellow to it. So it keeps that same undertone and all the hues go together, but it's just becoming lighter and lighter as it goes. Then this is the second lightest color, so as I go to the lightest color, I'll probably start adding some white in there as well. Now that I finished up with the stem, I need to mix the yellow colors for the yellow part of the flower. So for that, I went ahead and did my lemon yellow. I also took Permanent Yellow Deep, which is that orange color, and then I also got some Burnt Sienna, which is that brownie red color, and then of course white. I started with the lemon yellow as that base color, then added some of that orange and burnt sienna color in to give it a little bit different of a yellow tone. I felt like the lemon yellow was a little bit too highlighter yellow, so I wanted to give it a warmer feel. So that's what adding that orange tone did. And I'm just making it darker and darker by adding more of that orange, more of that burnt sienna. And as I go towards the middle of it, it became more reddish brown. So I added more of that burnt sienna, and there's the sunflower. Now is the part where I show you how I scan it and how I get it into Minecraft. I have a great HP scanner, so I drop that in and I'm able to scan it directly to my computer. Once that's in, I will save it to my files, open it up with Photoshop, and I will begin to crop out the individual textures. So even though the sunflower looks finished on the left, it needs to be two different square textures, so I'm gonna have to break that up. The first thing I'll do is start with selecting a square, and I do that by pressing Shift with the select tool and dragging that, and that'll make sure that it stays a square. Since this is a double height texture, I wanted to make sure the texture stayed continuous once I separated them and put them back together. In order to do that, I went ahead and cropped this as a rectangle, and then I would select a square from the rectangle, crop it, save it, go back to the rectangle, crop the same square, invert it, and save it like that. And that is how I made sure I cropped that middle line at the same place both times. Now I need to work on cropping out the white gridded background and just leaving the green painted stem in the middle. How I do this is a few different methods actually. So in this clip you can see me just taking the rectangular selection tool and starting there, but I wasn't too happy with it because I kind of like when I get those rough edges. So I went back in with the magic select tool, which allows you to select everything of a certain color all at once. So I just had to do a little bit extra work there to make sure I selected everything, and I would use the rectangular marquee tool at the end if I needed to. Then I need to fix all my mistakes that I couldn't do when I was painting. So often I'll leave a lot of white paper behind. I also use this opportunity to fix any egregious painting mistakes. I won't try to make everything perfectly square, but if the wrong color gets into the wrong square, especially if it starts to make the texture read incorrectly, like it doesn't actually look like the original Minecraft texture, then I will definitely go back in to fix it. Then I have to do that whole process again with the other 3 textures. When I'm done with the texture, I will go ahead and export that as a 512 by 512 PNG. When I have them all saved, you can just copy. Make sure you name them the exact same thing that is named in the Minecraft texture pack, the original one, and you can just paste it. It should say, hey, you already have this file here, are you sure you want to replace it? And you say, yes, replace it. Then you can hop into Minecraft, load in the texture pack immediately, hop into a world, and check out your progress. It is so cool to see something you've painted be in actual Minecraft. I've been playing Minecraft since 2011. It was still in beta, and I have never done something so cool with Minecraft. I love this game so much. I really appreciate everybody who's been watching my shorts of painting one of these textures every single day. It has been a huge commitment, but I have never had so much fun in my life. So thank you guys for all the support. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about what my process looks like when I'm actually painting these textures every single day. So please like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. I have a lot of fun videos coming up soon.